Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, your host. For more than 13 years, I've been handcrafting these sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, I love spotlighting diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. I invite you to listen up and change the way you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Alrighty then, let's dive in. This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about human rewilding, nurturing ourselves in nature. My guest today is Craig Foster. He is one of the world's leading natural history filmmakers and co-founder of the Sea Change Project. He won the Academy Award for Best Documentary for My Octopus Teacher, and has created over 100 films and documentaries in addition to his photography. Craig is coming to us from South Africa today, and he's got a new book that is coming out entitled Amphibious Soul, Finding the Wild in a Tame World. Welcome, Craig. Thanks for joining me today.
Wonderful to be with you, Lisa. Thanks so much.
You and I share a belief, I think, in the power of nature to heal. And I would love for you to talk about how you came to study nature and your realization that there is medicine in it.
Fantastic. So I was very fortunate to grow up right next to the Atlantic Ocean. Part of our house was actually below the high water mark. So the waves used to sometimes wash around the house at the big storms. And every day when I was young, I used to go out into that beautiful wild environment. So I had a love affair at a very young age. I started diving when I was 3 years old. And what I've found is that, one goes through ups and downs and difficulties in life. But I've found that love for nature as a child has kind of kept me balanced in the most difficult times and allowed me to get back to my center. And I think part of the reason is that if you think about it, in many ways, for over 90% of our time as a species and more percentage of a time as a genus, we have lived fully wild lives, completely connected to nature for 24 hours a day. Our species is 300,000 years old. The Homo genus is about 3 million years old. So it's millions of years of living close to what I call Big Mother, close to the one that birthed us and the one that looks after us. So when you re-enter that space and when you go into the wild, and especially if you are speaking her language, that has a profound effect on the psyche. And it makes you feel that you're at least living partly in your design, and that you're not, it makes you feel whole and balanced and connected to all the other species that share this planet with us.
I love what you just said about living close to our design?
Yes.
Yeah, that really speaks to me. And for me, being in nature is about also the reduction of the ego, right? Of the lower self, that we see ourselves as part of something so vast and great and not at the center of the universe.
I'm glad you said that because, I was very fortunate to be mentored by San people, the Ko and Glikwe and the Junkwasi from southern Africa live in the Kalahari. And their society goes back as old as 100 or 120,000 years. And their society was almost completely egalitarian. So there's tremendous balance between male and female. No one's dominant. And what they do is they enormously encourage no one to become better than others. The ego is consciously kept in check. So that's our natural way. That's our way that we've lived as a species for so long, because they are the oldest group of people on the planet. So we can reflect beautifully off their knowledge. So they actively suppress the ego. And you ask them, well, why would you do that? A hunter comes into a village with a big animal and they all ignore him, or they say, why have you bothered with that old bag of bones? Is to keep his ego in check. And when you ask them, they say, well, surely if somebody else feels they're better than, the rest of us, that's when all the problems start. So so it's in our design to live in that state you're talking about. And nature itself, of course, keeps our egos in check.
I think the other thing nature does is it regulates our systems. You know, that when we go out into nature and we become in tune with the weather, the light and dark, the sun and the moon, our systems become more regulated. Our sleep is better. Our productivity is better. We just follow the rhythms of nature and we seem to do better.
You're absolutely right. And I've experienced that in very profoundly with the cold, because my practice is to, dive without a wetsuit for fairly long periods every day. And of course, all early people would have been exposed to cold, especially in winter, every day. So I believe that regulates the hormonal system. It naturally fills the brain with lots of dopamine and noradrenaline and adrenaline. So you feel really good and motivated. So absolutely, if you're living connected to the wild in some ways, a lot of the systems in the body, the mind, work as they're designed to.
First of all, I want to say that you're courageous, diving in the cold without a wetsuit. I admire that. I'm scared of the cold, which is kind of silly. But I want to talk for a moment about the light pollution and noise pollution that comes from city life and how that has an effect on dysregulating our systems, and not just of human systems, but of animals as well. That birds that don't have proper mating cycles because they are living in the cities and so affected by the industrialization.
Certainly. I mean, one of my practices is to go out into the light half an hour after I wake up, just to tell my body, okay, it's this time of day. That's what I'm expecting. And it starts all the right chemical processes. And certainly for animals, light triggers a lot of their processes, as does temperature. We see in the water here, when the temperature rises fast, we get a lot of spawning happening. So animals are just reacting completely to the triggers from the wild. And when you get lots of light or sound pollution is a very bad thing in the ocean. It disrupts their lives.
It disrupts ours too.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't pay attention. We become so habituated, I think, to and visual noise and audible noise that we don't recognize that that's not normal.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we've, spent hundreds of thousands, millions of years living in small groups of 25 to 30 people, being highly nomadic, living in these vast landscapes filled with millions upon millions of animals. And we've learned these ways of tracking, of observation, and these incredibly strong social bonds as well. So you throw, when a child gets born, every child is born wild. It's actually expecting, it's a million years of evolution.
Isn't that true?
They're expecting a fully wild existence, and they're confronted with this really strange, in many ways, alien environment. So when you return to, at least, we can't go back to hunting and gathering existence, but we can return to quite a few of our wild connections. For me, I almost feel like in every single person, there's this beautiful wild being just crouching down, ready to come up and experience being inside that person. And for that full person to actually have that immense feeling of, oh my goodness, I am born wild. I can still hold on to my million-year-old inheritance. I can actually fulfill part of my design and my birthright. And that is a very powerful and uplifting experience.
So, when you speak about getting in connection with that wildness, right, which is the opposite of the domestication that we humans go through, from birth until death, what are some ways, obviously going into nature, but what are some ways that we might, more subtle ways that we might become more attuned to wilding?
A great question. I mean, what I've found is one of the most profound ways is by learning the oldest language on earth. And for me, that language is tracking. So it's observing small, subtle signs left by animals and by plants, and those are everywhere. They're even in our cities. They're certainly everywhere in wild places. It's not like just going for a walk in nature and you're striding along, making a lot of noise. You're going with reverence. You're going quietly, and you're taking note of all these things. And then over time, you actually learning those signs, and then you can be in conversation with the wild. It's a practice that I've laid out in my book. It's difficult to master like any great things, but you can get far quite quickly. And when you're in conversation with the wild, then you're in conversation with the original mother, and this incredible dialogue is going back and forth. And suddenly that whole wild world starts to open up, and you really sense how she is feeling, what she's doing. And it changes the pathways in your psyche.
And tracking it takes some practice, right? Because you have to learn the signs to know what animals, what leaves, what signs there are and what they mean.
Yes, but it's surprisingly simple if you're persistent. It's like a language, like you learn the letters, which are just the individual species and the individual tracks. Those are just your letters. Then you learn some of the behaviors. Then you learn some of the movements. And then after a while, like any language, oh my goodness, you string a sentence together and it gets very exciting. And then eventually, if you're just persistent and it's not that difficult and you keep at it, eventually you start to speak it. And then it's that dialogue lights you up in a way that no other language does, because that is the original language of our entire species.
And from that, I could see how you become part of a symphony, right? A symphony of what's going on around you and of the world. And the suspended, that deep thought, the rumination that we humans tend to live in our heads when we're in this state of tracking. There's wonder, there's curiosity, and there's full presence.
You're absolutely right. It's strange that you use that word symphony, because when I was working with my mentors in the Kalahari, these incredible master trackers, the San, it felt like they were hearing the symphony, and it was just silent for me, because a lot of their tracking is around alarm calls. So all the little birds tell them an enormous amount of information about what's going on in that wild landscape and what predators are moving. And just from the ripples, from a kilometer away from the ripples, they can feel big animals moving all over the landscape from the sound ripples from the tiny birds. And then that was extremely frustrating for me, because I could just see, and I was spent, a long time with them, and I was documenting this incredible process. And I knew the only way that I could start speaking that language was actually to immerse myself. And so that's what I've done for the last 12 years. I dived every day pretty much for 12 years, and then studied these animals and developed this underwater tracking. So I track animals underwater, which is much harder than doing it on land. But that's my place. That's my sanctuary that I feel very comfortable, from early childhood. I also do land tracking, but I specialize in underwater tracking.
But what you're suggesting is that we do this in our own nature, wherever we may be, that there's a place to go for each one of us, even in the city, I heard you mention, right? You can go into a park.
Exactly. And if you come to Africa in the middle of the bush, it's much harder because there's thousands of species, the tracks all over each other. Sometimes in a city, when you've just got a limited number of species, it's easier to get further quicker and more satisfying in a way. But it's surprising how many animals are in certain cities. I mean, many of these big cities, they get enormous number of bird species. You even get, foxes in certain cities in the world and other big predators. So it's not as, but they require, they're moving in sort of these shadow lines, often away from people. But if you're observant, you can pick them up and it's very satisfying.
When we talk about going into nature or wilding or returning to the Earth Mother, it doesn't necessarily require that we go off on an extensive trek or camp, right? It can be a small dose that will have a large lasting effect.
So this is a very important point you bring up, Lisa. In my mind, it's far more powerful and profound to get to know a tiny insect on your balcony in the middle of a city than going on a enormous safari to, Africa and seeing all these megafauna. Knowing that single one insect and watching that insect's life unfold and understanding it, just a few minutes every day, building up over time, will connect you far deeper to nature than a extravagant 2-week trip to the Masai Mara.
Let's take a pause. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with my guest today. To learn more about Craig Foster and his new book, Amphibious Soul, Finding the Wild in a Tame World, please visit seachangeproject.com, on Instagram at Sea Change Project, Facebook is The Sea Change Project, and on YouTube, Sea Change Project. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back. Research tells us that happiness is good for our health. Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Want more sound ideas for better well-being? Check out our new bonus edition content, More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness, available exclusively on Medium and Substack. One thing I know for certain, happiness waits for no one, and at times we all need a little support. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. And we're back talking with Craig Foster about human rewilding, nurturing ourselves in nature. Let's get back to the conversation. So, Craig, let's talk a little bit about creating a toolkit to track and be with nature. Not be in, but be with.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's an incredible feeling being inside nature and having this dialogue. And what I've found is you actually don't want a lot of equipment. A reasonable cell phone with a decent camera and a notebook is pretty much all you need. A reasonable pair of shoes if it's rough terrain. And literally, you just photograph things. You start with just trying to know a few species, like 10 species in your backyard. Just try and photograph them, write down what you think they are, trying to identify them. You might want to get a little guidebook so that'll help you. And you can focus on insects or birds, but you can also, spread it across, introduce amphibians or whatever you like. And you just have to do it regularly, and you don't need, too much time, but the regularity is the big thing. And you take those pictures and you start writing in your nature diary. And that becomes this incredible, valuable tool to understanding the wild. And you just keep making the little notes and you keep making the observations. And soon you will see, oh my goodness, these animals are reacting differently as the seasons are changing. Oh, these animals just come in, or that plant has just blossomed. And you start to see all these patterns that are right in front of you. Once you've done that process, you almost can't imagine that you were blind to all of this stuff before. You just can't actually believe that this magnificent language was unfolding in front of you and you were oblivious to it. And that act of observing and connecting and taking note and being curious fundamentally changes your relationship with the world and with yourself, because you are then speaking to the wild person that's inside. You're speaking to 3 million years of your deep inheritance and your ancestry.
I love this. What I love about this is the simplicity, the availability, right? It does not require anything, has nothing to do with economics. Most of the population possesses all the gear that you're talking about.
I mean, yes, you just need time. That's the precious thing. You need the time and some kind of access. Although nature is everywhere, even the sky above. There's a lot going on. So absolutely, it's not as difficult as you think, and you don't need to. You're not going to master it in a short time. That's the beauty of it. This is a lifelong dialogue that you can have. You're not going to get bored. I can promise you that.
Yeah. Well, it's like you will never see the same thing twice. You might think it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I've spent, years going to exactly the same little piece of kelp forest. And after, say, 3 years, I think, okay, I really know everything that's going on here. And then just as I say that, a whole other layer of wild existence opens up to me. And I just cannot believe that that's been there the whole time. So these incredible layers of wildness that are just waiting for us to discover.
And what I think I hear you saying is that the process of the tracking is only one component, right? That it's the observing the photographs and the journaling about the observation that is the second and perhaps maybe even more important part of this.
Yes, and the subtleties, after a while, you're not just looking for clear animal tracks. You're just looking for the gait of the animal. You don't even need to see how it's clear. You just know what it is. There are other aspects, though, to this whole process of connecting to the wild. There's a sense of trying to get to also know where you come from. So, who your ancestors were, how did they live? The fact that Africa is the home of every single person on this planet. That's the ancestral home of all of us. Just knowing that and knowing a bit about where we've come from makes a big difference to this at all. When I light a fire, every time I do that, I feel my Homo erectus ancestor who's come through and allowed me to be here, lighting that first fire 500,000 years ago and controlling it. So you have these incredible sense of our deep prehistory. Play is another big part of what we do. So being playful and playing in this wild environment also connects you to it in a beautiful way. And it just, makes you feel free and, it connects to your childhood. Getting cold is a big factor. You can't believe how profound that feeling is, and being able to be without a wetsuit and free in this wild environment. The cold stimulates the brain chemistry in an incredible way. And if you calm in the cold, all the beautiful hormones go into the brain. But you have to actually consciously relax so you don't induce the cortisol to flood the system, because that's not great. And if you're fearful of it, of course, then the cortisol comes. So you've kind of got to train yourself to be just quite calm, even though you might be going to very cold water or going out in the environment without, massive protection in the cold. So, yeah.
That's a practice to be cultivated. For me, I'm only speaking for myself here. Let me ask you about your exploration of the depths of the ocean and how it has impacted your connection and relationship to other humans.
Okay, it was quite fascinating for me. So I was sort of trying to observe myself as well in this process. So what happens is when you're visiting a wild place every day, and I'm very fortunate, the tremendous biodiversity in this environment I'm in. So you're getting to know lots of different species, hundreds of different species. And after quite a time, you start to see them in a different light. You don't see them like, oh, there's another animal there. You start to feel uh, that they're part of what I call kin. That they feel like kin. They feel like a type of family. And you even get to know individuals. Like I saw an individual today, a fish I know very well that's got this strange bottom jaw. And I'm very fond of this animal. It's very shy. And I've known him for many years. So you get to know these different animals and they feel like family. So humans have done this for, thousands and thousands of years. And what I've found happens is I've become a little less reliant and needy of my human relationships because I've got all these other species that I have these connections with and a tremendous love for. So it takes a little bit of pressure off my relationship, say, with my wife, who often dives with me, and we have a very fortunate, wonderful relationship. But it takes a little bit of pressure off that and my other close friends because you just feel filled up by these extraordinary animals. And when I get to know their secret behaviors, because I'm there every day observing, and then you suddenly see, oh my goodness, this is what they're doing. Some of it's new to science, some of it's not. It just fills you up in a way that changes your relationships with other humans.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the humans are no longer the sole source of relationship, right? Your relationship world is expanded infinitely, right? Because the relationship is with the entirety, not just humans.
It's very strong. That is such a
Yes.
strong feeling. You're always feeling these other non-human persons that are inhabiting your world. And you feel very sensitive to them because they don't have voices. They don't have, they can't vote, or they haven't got sometimes that much control over their existence. So you feel very strongly for them. But also what happens, which is extremely powerful, is you start to realize that these animals, especially the small animals and the small plants, are actually responsible for all of us humans on the planet being able to survive and breathe and eat. They are the life support system of this planet. They are the biodiversity that keeps us alive from second to second. If they go in large numbers, we vanish. We cannot exist. And this is the great sort of forgetting that seems to have happened, is that all businesses, all governments, all investments, all rely entirely on the natural system to keep those investments in place. But yet there's almost no focus or no care for the fundamental thing that keeps everything going. So if you've got $100 million in a bank account and the biodiversity drops, that will be worth zero.
Yeah. Truth.
So if you can imagine what it is like, is that we are like a very, very fragile child, completely dependent on our mother, which is nature and biodiversity and this life support system. Yet the child has forgotten that the mother is keeping it alive. So my, deep wish is that a lot more focus can go back to mother and help her regenerate, because she is keeping us going. She's keeping everything afloat. She's the foundation of every single thing we do. You cannot live independent of her. It's impossible.
And I think from what you say, that your mission is to make us remember and engage and protect and preserve.
So what I've found is that it's extremely difficult to care about nature or this fundamental thing that's keeping everyone alive unless you reconnect with the inherent wildness in all of us. As soon as you connect to the wildness, you realize what's going on, and then it's very difficult to harm the mother. But because we've come into this strange environment and we've had to survive, and it's actually very difficult for a wild-born human. It's quite traumatic in many ways, unconsciously. It allows us to just plunder and do terrible things to our mother without even thinking about it.
Craig Foster, thanks for joining me today. We're out of time. This conversation is very thought-provoking, and I'm hoping for our listeners, action-provoking, to get people to go out into nature and experience part of their wild selves and connect with Mother. I think that's all. We should end there. To learn more, please visit seechangeproject.com, on Instagram at seechangeproject, on Facebook, The Sea Change Project, and Sea Change Project on YouTube. Craig, thank you for joining me.
Wonderful talking to you, Lisa. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guest, Craig Foster, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another. Want to take a deeper dive into sound ideas for better well-being? Check out our new bonus edition content, More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness, available exclusively on Medium and Substack. Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime, anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes from wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by me, Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the awesome team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.